pregnant wife gave birth, but her millionaire husband was nowhere to be found her next move. Melissa Davis never imagined that the happiest day of her life, welcoming her first child into the world, would also be her loneliest. Married to the charismatic millionaire Christopher Davis, she had everything money could buy: lavish parties, extravagant gifts, and a picturesque mansion perched on a verdant hillside. Yet when her labor pains struck in the dead of night, Christopher was nowhere to be found. That glaring absence became the spark that shattered her illusions. In her darkest hour, she had a single, unwavering thought: if her husband wouldn't stand by her now, she would ensure he'd live to regret every betrayal that led to this moment. Melissa Davis was born and raised in a small town called Fairvale, where life moved at a gentle pace. She grew up in a modest 2-bedroom house with her parents and younger brother. Her father, Peter Grant, worked as a mechanic, and her mother, Lydia Grant, was a school teacher. They had taught Melissa that hard work and kindness were the cornerstones of a fulfilling life. Even in those early days, Melissa dreamed of something beyond the narrow roads and quiet nights of Fairvale. She longed for excitement, opportunity, and a chance to make her mark on the world. Driven by a fervent desire to explore, Melissa won a scholarship to an upscale university in the city. There, surrounded by towering skyscrapers and the hum of endless possibilities, she felt both overwhelmed and exhilarated. She majored in marketing, hoping the degree would catapult her into a career brimming with challenges and rewards. But it wasn't just the academic world that captured her imagination. The vibrant city nightlife, the swirl of new friendships, and the sense of freedom were all part of the allure. It was during her sophomore year that she first met Christopher Davis at a charity ball. Melissa had only been able to attend thanks to a friend who'd given her a spare ticket. The event was organized by one of the city's most prominent philanthropists, someone who frequently invited celebrity investors, entrepreneurs, and even public figures such as Elon Musk for cameo appearances. But that evening, among the elegantly dressed crowd, Christopher Davis caught Melissa's eye. Christopher was known as a tech entrepreneur who'd made a windfall with a cutting-edge app that soared in popularity. With dark, neatly combed hair and penetrating grey eyes, he exuded confidence and success. His aura seemed to ignite the room. When he smiled in her direction, Melissa felt a spark. She could never have known then how that fleeting connection would reshape her destiny. Throughout the evening, Christopher engaged Melissa in a spirited conversation. He seemed genuinely interested in her background, her dreams, and how she was adapting to city life. Unlike the wealthy magnates who often flaunted their power, Christopher was charmingly down to earth, at least on the surface. That very night he asked for her number, and she gave it without hesitation. Her heart fluttered with promise. In the days that followed, their conversations over cups of coffee stretched into hours. Christopher admired her ambition and sense of wonder. Melissa was captivated by his intelligence and the mysterious air he carried, like he knew secrets about how the world worked. By the time Melissa graduated, they were officially a couple, in love and brimming with shared plans for the future. She imagined a life filled with big city dreams, love's warm glow, and the kind of success story that would make her parents proud. But no fairy tale is complete without shadows. Even in those early days, there were fleeting moments when Christopher would evade certain topics about his past or make cryptic remarks about trusting no one. Melissa brushed it aside as mere eccentricity. After all, everyone has secrets, right? They were married the following autumn in a lavish ceremony under a canopy of golden leaves. Melissa wore a delicate white gown, her cheeks pink with joy, while Christopher looked every bit the dashing self-made millionaire. The world seemed open and wide, full of possibility. Little did Melissa know, her journey was only beginning. After the wedding, Melissa moved into Christopher's sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city. The house, ensconced by high hedges and electric gates, was a fortress of solitude, reflecting Christopher's desire for privacy. Inside, marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and art pieces from across the globe adorned the walls. Each room was styled with an elegant blend of classic architecture and modern furnishings, and from the second-floor balcony you could see the city skyline glimmering at night like a sea of stars. For Melissa, it was surreal stepping into that world. She had grown up in a simple household where leftover casserole was considered the height of luxury. Here, the staff insisted on preparing elaborate meals served on porcelain plates with gold trim. There was a live-in housekeeper, a gardener who doubled as a handyman, and even a chauffeur for special occasions. At first, Melissa felt guilty about the indulgence. She would often sneak to the kitchen to help clean her own dishes or do laundry just to feel grounded. Yet, beneath the glitz, she found moments of genuine happiness. She and Christopher would spend their evenings discussing tech innovations, philanthropic visions, and how they might one day build a foundation to help disadvantaged kids. To Melissa, Christopher seemed to have an inexhaustible reservoir of passion, always dreaming, always planning. Whenever he disappeared into late-night business meetings, he'd reassure her with a kiss on the forehead, promising that all the sacrifices he made were for their future. She believed him because, in her eyes, he was a man who could conquer anything. Still, warning signs of trouble flickered now and then. Christopher had a propensity for sudden mood swings, especially when his phone buzzed with certain calls. He'd slip out of the room to answer in hushed tones. Once, Melissa overheard an argument in his study, muffled threats about a business deal that had apparently gone sour. When she asked if everything was all right, Christopher brushed it off, telling her it was just business stress, something she didn't need to worry about. Moreover, they rarely hosted gatherings at the mansion. For someone so wealthy and successful, Christopher seemed oddly reclusive. Though he was cordial at high-end networking events, he rarely invited friends or colleagues to their home. He claimed he valued his privacy, and Melissa initially accepted that explanation. Having grown up in a tight-knit neighborhood, however, she found the emptiness of their social life unsettling. During moments of doubt, Melissa would think back to the man who had swept her off her feet, a man who said he saw a future with her. She reminded herself that Christopher's occasional secrecy was likely a byproduct of the cutthroat business world. She resolved to stand by him, offering patience and understanding. Unbeknownst to her, these early questions about Christopher's integrity would balloon into mysteries far darker than she imagined. A year into their marriage, Melissa discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a blend of exhilaration and apprehension. How would Christopher handle a baby? Would parenthood change them both for the better? When she broke the news to him, he looked genuinely pleased, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. For the next few weeks, he showered her with attention, cancelling some business trips, accompanying her to medical appointments, and even picking out potential names together. For a while, it felt like their marriage was heading into a golden age, but soon Christopher's phone began buzzing with increasing frequency. Late-night texts and urgent calls gradually drew him back into the swirl of high-stakes negotiations. He started traveling more, discussing expansions of his tech empire in hush-hush tones. Whenever he returned, the tension in his shoulders was palpable, and the warm smiles he once gave so freely became rare. Melissa, now navigating the emotional tides of pregnancy, found herself at a crossroads. Should she push for answers and risk fueling an argument, or remain quietly supportive, trusting him to handle his affairs? Early in her second trimester, she experienced sharp abdominal pains that sent her to the emergency room in a panic. It turned out to be stress-related cramping. The doctor advised more rest and less worry. When she tried telling Christopher how frightened she'd been, he simply replied, "Everything's going to be fine," before kissing her forehead and marching off to a hastily scheduled meeting. She felt alone in those moments, her heart brimming with longing for her husband's genuine presence. At times, Christopher would attempt to be attentive, bringing her herbal teas or rubbing her back when she felt achy. But these gestures were fleeting, overshadowed by his abrupt disappearances. Melissa was determined not to be a burden, telling herself that he was sacrificing so that their child could have a life of ease and opportunity. She drew comfort from the baby growing inside her, whispering words of love to the little one when Christopher was away. The more Christopher distanced himself, the more uncertain Melissa became about the reality of his world. Old rumors about questionable deals drifted through her mind. She recalled that cryptic phone call she'd overheard, the sense that something in Christopher's empire was not as pristine as it appeared. Yet, every time she contemplated pressing him for the truth, she felt an invisible barrier. He was her husband, the father of her unborn child. Didn't she owe him loyalty? Her mind spun with confusion. As the due date loomed, so did Melissa's anxiety. She had pictured Christopher by her bedside, holding her hand, offering steady reassurance. Now, she wasn't even sure if he'd pick up her calls in time. Even her parents, still living in Fairvale, grew concerned. Her mother offered to stay with her in the city, but Melissa politely declined, not wanting to intrude on Christopher's privacy. She believed that, in the final hour, Christopher would prioritize family above all else. It wasn't just a hope, it was her deepest prayer. One evening, about a month before her due date, Melissa stumbled upon an envelope in Christopher's study while looking for a pen. The envelope bore an unfamiliar name, Ariel Summers, and contained a hotel receipt for a suite booked on nights. Christopher claimed to be out of town for business. The charges were staggering, including room service orders for 2 and spa packages. Confusion turned to dread in Melissa's gut as she realized the timeline of those receipts coincided with her pregnancy months. She remembered the cryptic phone calls, his sudden trips, and how each time he came back more distant than before. Shaken, she confronted Christopher as soon as he arrived home. His face went pale for a split second before he mustered a dismissive chuckle. "It's just business," he insisted, taking the receipt from her hand. "Ariel is a potential investor. We had to wine and dine her, that's all. Relax, Melissa." But Melissa saw the tremble in his hand, heard the quickened pace of his breathing. In that moment, doubt invaded her heart. The man she had loved so wholly, so faithfully, might be lying. Worse, she suspected he was unfaithful, carrying on a secret affair, while she battled morning sickness and prepared to bring their child into the world. She felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. In the subsequent days, Christopher tried to smooth things over, leaving expensive bouquets in the living room, placing glittering jewelry on her dresser like peace offerings. His attempts felt hollow. Melissa's instincts told her something fundamental in their relationship had changed. Trust, the bedrock of marriage, was eroding before her eyes. Though she wanted more than anything to believe him, an uneasy voice in her mind continued to echo, "He's hiding something." Desperate for clarity, Melissa confided in her lifelong friend, Janine, the one who had invited her to that fateful charity event so many years ago. Janine was furious upon hearing how Christopher had brushed off the suspicious hotel bills. "You're about to have his baby," Janine exclaimed, "yet he's gallivanting around with some other woman. That's not just business." Melissa broke down in tears, uncertain of which was more painful, her sense of betrayal or the guilt she felt for possibly misjudging him. At night, Melissa found herself lying awake, hand on her belly, trying to decipher the complexity of Christopher's actions. His lavish spending, late nights, abrupt meetings, hotel receipts, and secretive phone calls all pointed to something. But was it an affair or something else entirely? Financial impropriety, maybe? Melissa half hoped it was just a business deal gone strange. Admitting that her husband might be cheating felt like a betrayal of the life she had built. Her thoughts swirled endlessly, holding her in a choking haze. With the baby's arrival only weeks away, she knew she needed solid answers. Melissa silently resolved that she would uncover the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. She deserved better than to be left in the dark, and her child deserved a father unburdened by lies. Little did she know that the events about to unfold would make simple doubts seem like mild storms compared to the hurricane looming on the horizon. Late one evening, just before her due date, Melissa felt a deep, wrenching pain in her abdomen. She had been in the kitchen, sipping ginger tea to soothe her nerves, when the sudden pang caused her to drop the cup, sending it shattering across the floor. Fear crashed over her like a tidal wave. She was alone in the house. Christopher had left early that morning for another urgent meeting across the state. The housekeeper had gone to visit her family for the weekend. In that moment, the weight of helplessness pressed on Melissa's chest. Gasping from the contractions, she fumbled for her phone. Her first instinct was to call Christopher, but each attempt went straight to voicemail. As wave after wave of contraction tore through her, she knew she couldn't delay. She dialed emergency services, her voice trembling as she explained she was going into labor and that she was completely alone. The operator assured her that help was on the way. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, gently lifting her onto a stretcher. She clutched the phone in her hand, still hoping Christopher would call back. Each unanswered ring felt like a betrayal. The ambulance's siren wailed through the dark streets as they sped toward the hospital. Melissa felt tears streaming down her face. This was supposed to be a moment of joy, shared hand in hand with her husband. Instead, she was whisked away in a swirl of panic and loneliness. At the hospital, nurses and doctors rushed to prepare for the delivery. Melissa felt disoriented, her world spinning with pain and heartbreak. She tried to focus on the baby, breathing through the contractions as the medical team encouraged her. The clock on the wall seemed to stretch time, each minute a small eternity. She checked her phone repeatedly between contractions, but there was nothing from Christopher. After hours of labor, in a haze of tears and clenched fists, Melissa gave one final push. The air was filled with the piercing cry of a newborn. Relief and euphoria flooded her, tears of joy mixing with sorrow. The nurses placed the tiny baby boy in her arms, an angelic face, a tiny tuft of dark hair, a pair of curious, scrunched-up eyes. In that instant, Melissa felt an unbreakable bond. She whispered softly to him, "I'm here. I'll always be here." When she glanced at the clock again, it was nearly dawn. Christopher had not appeared. She could only imagine him in some distant hotel room, or maybe in the arms of that woman named Ariel. The pain in her chest rivaled the physical agony she had just endured. Still, she refused to let bitterness overshadow her child's first moments. She named him Adam, recalling the name Christopher had once liked. She told herself that, despite everything, she wanted their son to have at least the semblance of a connection to his father. Early the next morning, Janine rushed into the hospital room, out of breath, eyes wide with concern. She embraced Melissa and held baby Adam with tender care. Melissa could only shake her head when Janine asked about Christopher. The humiliation was acute. In that moment, Melissa realized she was effectively alone in her brand new world of motherhood, and a small, fierce flame ignited in her. If Christopher thought he could abandon them, she would find a way to make him regret it. After giving birth, Melissa stayed in the hospital for a few days to recover from the strain of labor. The swirl of visitors she had anticipated, Christopher's colleagues, mutual friends, and well-wishers, never materialized. Only Janine and Melissa's parents, who drove in from Fairvale the moment they heard the news, kept vigil at her bedside. Each day, the emptiness at not seeing Christopher deepened Melissa's resolve to uncover the truth. Physically, she was exhausted. Her body ached, and she struggled with sleeplessness, afraid that if she closed her eyes, she might miss a call or text from her husband. Her mother fussed over her, bringing homemade soups and carefully burping baby Adam. Her father, stoic as always, gently reminded her that she had a support system in Fairvale if she ever needed it. Beneath their concern, Melissa sensed a quiet anger toward Christopher, though they never voiced it in front of her. On the morning of her discharge, Melissa felt a conflicting mix of joy and dread. She clutched baby Adam to her chest, stepping into the bright sunlight outside the hospital. Janine had brought her car around, offering to drive them home. While inside the vehicle, Melissa stared out the window, remembering how, just months before, she had excitedly planned a nursery filled with pastel colors and stuffed animals, anticipating the day they'd bring their child home together. That vision contrasted sharply with the harsh reality unfolding now. Returning to the mansion felt surreal. The quiet corridors and cavernous rooms only amplified her sense of betrayal. A kind neighbor had dropped off a few baby gifts at the front gate, but aside from that, there was no fanfare, no Christopher, no balloons, no celebration. It was just Melissa and her newborn, alone in a house that once symbolized romance and success. Overwhelmed by the deafening silence, Melissa wasted no time. She texted Christopher, laying out her emotions in stark terms. She had given birth to their son, and his absence was inexcusable. She demanded an explanation. She typed feverishly, hitting send with a trembling finger. The message was delivered but not read. Hours turned into a day, then 2 days, then 3. Still no reply. Each night, as she rocked Adam to sleep, she felt a wave of sorrow. She pressed her lips to the baby's forehead, promising to protect him from whatever storms lay ahead. And in the flicker of the bedside lamp, she caught a glimpse of her own reflection, tired, determined, and brimming with the faint embers of anger. She realized she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for Adam's future. It was a pivotal moment, one that would steer Melissa toward the decisive steps she would soon take. If Christopher thought he could simply ghost his family and keep living his millionaire lifestyle unscathed, he was sorely mistaken. The gentle, ever-patient Melissa was beginning to transform into a woman ready to fight back. And that fight would start by unraveling all the secrets Christopher tried so hard to hide. Determined to peel away Christopher's deceptions, Melissa decided to hire a private investigator. Her friend Janine recommended a man named Dominic Pierce, an ex-cop with a reputation for bulldog tenacity. He arrived at the mansion on a drizzly afternoon, wearing a worn leather jacket and a no-nonsense expression. After exchanging pleasantries, Dominic slid a notepad from his pocket, ready to record any details Melissa could recall. She recounted the suspicious hotel receipt under the name Ariel Summers, the abrupt business trips, the hushed phone calls, and the final blow of his complete disappearance during her labor. Dominic took notes meticulously, his dark eyes flashing with both curiosity and concern. He asked for any phone records, credit card statements, or travel itineraries Christopher had left behind. Melissa handed over what little she could find. The deeper they delved, the more glaring the discrepancies became. Dominic promised to start his investigation immediately. In a gruff but reassuring tone, he said, "I've seen this kind of thing before. Men who think they're untouchable. Don't worry, I'll get to the bottom of it." After he left, Melissa felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. What if the truth was more heartbreaking than a simple affair? The questions kept swirling. Within a week, Dominic called her with a preliminary update. He had tracked Christopher to several upscale hotels under various aliases. Sometimes he used the name C. Donovan, other times Chris Davison. The puzzle pieces indicated not just a single affair, but a string of possible extramarital escapades or perhaps business dealings disguised as personal visits. Dominic also discovered that Christopher had offshore bank accounts, with large sums transferred at irregular intervals. It was enough to raise red flags for money laundering or other financial crimes. But the most alarming discovery came from a background check Dominic conducted. Christopher had changed his surname years ago. Melissa had always known Christopher was previously Christopher Delaney, but she assumed it was a formal name change for personal reasons. Now, Dominic's search revealed that Christopher had a sealed legal record, including allegations of fraud and embezzlement from an old startup he'd launched straight out of college. The charges never went to trial due to lack of evidence. But the pattern was there. Christopher was no angel. Each revelation pounded at Melissa's heart, threatening to break it anew. Gone was the naive faith she once had. Now, she realized she had fallen in love with a man who might be weaving a web of criminal enterprises and secret affairs. She cradled baby Adam in her arms, wondering how she could protect him from the fallout that might ensue. If Christopher was tangled up in illegal activities, it wouldn't just be her heartbreak at stake. It could mean public scandal, financial ruin, and even danger for their child. Unwilling to let fear dictate her next move, Melissa steeled herself. She decided that the first step was to secure Adam's future. If Christopher was funneling money into offshore accounts, she needed to ensure that she and Adam would not be left high and dry. She contacted a family law attorney named Patricia Yates, who had a reputation for being fiercely protective of her clients. When Patricia heard Melissa's story, she wasted no time gathering documents for a potential divorce and custody battle. The die was cast. Melissa's heartbreak had transformed into determination. She refused to stand by as Christopher humiliated and endangered them. If he wouldn't show up willingly to face his responsibilities, she would drag him into the light of day, forcing him to confront his actions before a judge if necessary. With the legal wheels turning and Dominic's investigation in full swing, Melissa tried one more time to contact Christopher directly. She sent a concise email detailing what she knew: the suspicious hotel stays, the sealed legal record, the offshore accounts. She demanded he return home at once to face his responsibilities. She also warned him that if he didn't, she would be forced to pursue legal action. Melissa waited, heart pounding, for any response. Days passed and her inbox remained empty. Strangely, Christopher's social media accounts, though seldom updated, also went dormant. She found no new traces of him on his company's official site. All press releases described him only in glowing terms, lauding his entrepreneurial genius. But there were no personal updates, no mention of his newborn child. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Late one night, as Melissa sat in the nursery rocking Adam to sleep, Dominic called with urgent news. Christopher had been spotted at a private club in the heart of the city, accompanied by a woman whose description fit Ariel Summers. Dominic couldn't get photographic evidence at that moment, but he was certain it was them. Furious, Melissa felt her maternal instincts surge. How dare Christopher parade around with another woman while abandoning his own son? Emboldened by anger and heartbreak, Melissa arranged with Dominic and Janine to confront Christopher. Word on the street was that Christopher sometimes attended exclusive business functions at a downtown penthouse. If he was so brazen as to make public appearances, Melissa would force a face-to-face meeting. The plan was simple. Janine would gain entry to the function as a +1 of a known investor, and then she would discreetly text Dominic and Melissa once Christopher showed up. The idea was to catch him off guard, ensuring he couldn't slip away. 2 nights later, Melissa found herself waiting in a parked car a block away from the glittering skyscraper hosting the event. Her heart thundered in her chest as she watched a parade of luxury vehicles drop off men and women in designer attire. Janine had texted that Christopher was inside, wearing a tailored navy suit and moving in the company of a sleek, raven-haired woman. Dominic, stationed nearby, gave Melissa a nod. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked, concern flickering in his eyes. Melissa clenched her fists, remembering the agony of giving birth alone, the sleepless nights, and the humiliating discovery of Christopher's possible crimes. "I have to," she whispered. With that, she slipped out of the car, her legs trembling with adrenaline and rage. In the elevator ride to the penthouse suite, she tried to calm her nerves. The mirrored walls reflected a woman changed by heartbreak and determination. When the doors opened, she stepped into a lavish reception area brimming with wealthy elites, champagne flutes, and soft jazz music. Spotting Janine near the back, Melissa navigated the crowd, scanning for Christopher. It didn't take long to find him. He stood near a marble fireplace, whispering intimately into the ear of a stunning woman in a sequined gown. Melissa's throat constricted at the sight. She marched over, her presence drawing startled looks from those nearby. Christopher turned his head, eyes widening as he spotted Melissa. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. "Melissa?" His voice was barely above a whisper. She stood her ground, voice quivering with anger. "How dare you disappear when your son was born? How dare you ignore every message, every call?" She locked eyes with him, refusing to be intimidated. The room went silent. Ariel Summers glared at Melissa before stepping aside, her lips pursed in annoyance. Christopher appeared momentarily speechless, as though 1,000 excuses jostled in his mind but refused to emerge. In that charged stillness, Melissa could feel the eyes of the social elite upon her, some laced with pity, others with curiosity. Finally, Christopher spoke. "Not here," he said, lowering his voice as he grabbed Melissa's arm to steer her away from prying ears. But she yanked her arm free. "You don't get to hush me away," she snapped. "I've spent months being silent. We talk now, in front of everyone." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. A hush fell over the room as Melissa's words sliced through the elegant facade. It was a turning point, one that spelled the beginning of Christopher's humiliating downfall. Christopher's face reddened, anger and panic flaring in his eyes. It was evident he was torn between wanting to publicly dismiss Melissa and recognizing that she held dangerous knowledge that could undermine his entire empire if exposed. Taking a deep breath, he guided Melissa to a small alcove near the coat check, away from the main gathering. Dominic and Janine lingered within sight, ready to intervene if Christopher tried to slip away. In the alcove's dim light, Melissa confronted him. "How could you leave me alone to give birth to our son? Do you have any idea what you've put me through?" She held her phone screen toward him, revealing the frantic texts and calls she had sent. Christopher ran a hand through his hair, his voice trembling. "Melissa, you don't understand the pressure I've been under." Her eyes narrowed. "Pressure? Pressure doesn't justify abandoning your family." She took a step closer, refusing to let him tower over her. "I know about Ariel. I know about the offshore accounts. I even know about your sealed legal records. Whatever game you're playing, it ends now." Christopher's jaw clenched. He exhaled sharply as though steeling himself. "Listen, there were deals I couldn't close with you hovering over me, suspicious all the time." His words dripped with callousness. "That's why I had to handle things on my own." He shot a quick glance at Dominic and Janine, who watched them intently. "Some of these investments, if they're made public, they'd kill my reputation." Melissa shook her head, appalled. "Your reputation? You think that's all this is about?" You have a son, Christopher, a baby who's never seen his father's face. A flicker of guilt crossed Christopher's face, but he quickly masked it with indignation. I never asked for this to happen right now, he muttered. I had business expansions. Things got complicated. Melissa's fury peaked. She wanted to scream, to demand an apology, to see remorse in his eyes. But all she saw was a man more concerned with power than family. You're unbelievable, she said, voice quivering. You're about to lose everything you claim to value, starting with your family. At that moment, Janine stepped forward. I think it's time for you to leave, Christopher, she said quietly, but with an undeniable undertone of steel. Christopher hesitated. He glanced at the door leading back to the event, as if weighing whether to spin a story for the onlookers. In the end, he simply gave Melissa one last, venomous look and marched away, disappearing back into the crowd. Tears blurred Melissa's vision. She could hardly stand. Janine supported her, arms wrapped around her shoulders. Dominic offered a quiet nod, as though confirming that Christopher's brazen behavior was all the proof they needed of his disregard. The confrontation had been messy and public, yet it brought a strange sense of catharsis. Melissa no longer had any illusions about the man she married. That very night, Melissa called her lawyer, Patricia Yates, and relayed what had happened. Patricia assured her that this display of callousness could be used as evidence of emotional neglect in any upcoming custody or divorce proceedings. Melissa felt a swirl of exhaustion and determination. Despite her heartbreak, she vowed to protect her son from Christopher's reckless world. In the weeks that followed the confrontation, Melissa took decisive steps toward independence. She spoke daily with Patricia, building the foundation for a legal case that would ensure Adam's well-being and secure child support. Patricia filed an official petition for divorce on Melissa's behalf, naming irreconcilable differences, financial deception, and emotional abandonment. Melissa felt a bittersweet pang upon signing those documents. This wasn't the future she had dreamed of, but it was the only path forward. Meanwhile, Dominic continued to dig into Christopher's affairs. He uncovered more details about the offshore accounts and suspected fraud tied to Christopher's tech empire. It seemed that Christopher was funneling investor money to shell companies under different names, all while living the high life. Dominic even discovered records of Christopher meeting with other questionable figures, people with rumored ties to money laundering. If exposed, Christopher's entire house of cards could tumble. Yet, Melissa's primary concern was Adam. She poured her love into caring for him, waking each morning to feed him, cuddling him, and cooing at his precious smiles. She took him for walks around the mansion's landscaped gardens, trying to provide a semblance of normalcy. In those quiet moments, she understood that Adam was her beacon of hope. Everything she fought for now was to ensure his future remained untainted by Christopher's toxic legacy. One of the first big changes Melissa made was to hire her own financial advisor, a gentle but sharp-minded woman named Gabriella Tan. Gabriella helped Melissa create separate bank accounts and taught her how to safeguard her assets. She also recommended transferring partial ownership of the mansion into Melissa's name if possible, given the marriage laws in their state. While the legalities could be messy, this would at least grant Melissa some control over the property where she currently resided. Simultaneously, Melissa wrestled with an emotional storm. She felt guilty, as though she had failed in her marital vows, yet deep down she knew it was Christopher who had sabotaged their union. At times, she found herself missing the idealized version of him, his warm smile, the gentle way he used to talk about building a family. She would hold Adam and remember the nights Christopher whispered about how wonderful fatherhood would be. It felt like those memories belonged to a different man, and perhaps, in some sense, they did. Support poured in from unexpected places. Her parents, though devastated by the unfolding drama, reminded her that real love never abandons you when you need it most. Friends from college reached out once the news began circulating that Christopher Davis was embroiled in a scandal. Some offered places to stay, while others provided moral support. Janine remained her rock, coming over frequently to help with Adam, ensuring Melissa had time to rest or consult with Patricia and Dominic. Slowly but surely, Melissa felt her emotional wounds begin to scab over. She wasn't fully healed, far from it, but she was growing stronger. The heartbreak was tempered by a fierce determination. Christopher might have wealth and connections, but she had truth on her side. If he thought he could dodge accountability, he had grossly underestimated her resolve. Amid the flurry of legal proceedings and detective work, Melissa was stunned when a crisp, white envelope arrived at the mansion's door. It bore Christopher's personal seal. Inside was a typed letter, brief and to the point. Melissa, I realize our last meeting was chaotic. I need you to understand there are forces at play you know nothing about. I did what I had to for the benefit of our family, even if it looks otherwise right now. Let's talk privately, no lawyers, no PIs. I want to make amends. Christopher. Melissa's hands shook as she read. The letter ended with a phone number and a proposed location, an upscale restaurant downtown. A swirl of emotions battered her. Was this a trap, a ploy to manipulate her into dropping the legal case? Or was there a hint of genuine remorse? Despite everything, a tiny flicker of hope fluttered in her chest. She reminded herself not to be naive. That evening, after putting Adam to bed, she called Patricia for advice. Patricia cautioned her to bring Dominic or Janine as backup if she decided to meet Christopher. You need witnesses if things go sour, she said firmly. Dominic agreed, volunteering to sit inconspicuously at a nearby table. Melissa mulled over the offer, unsure if she could stomach another confrontation, but concluded that hearing Christopher out was essential. If there was any chance of an amicable resolution, for Adam's sake she had to explore it. On a chilly, overcast afternoon, Melissa arrived at the restaurant, heart pounding. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back. At a corner table, Christopher awaited, wearing a tailored suit and sporting that charming, polished exterior she once found so irresistible. She met his gaze and felt a pang of conflicting emotions, loss, longing, and anger all at once. He stood to greet her, attempting to lean in for a kiss on the cheek, but Melissa stepped back. She sat down, arms crossed, trying to maintain composure. You have 10 minutes, she said bluntly. For a moment, he looked wounded, as though taken aback by her coldness. Then he launched into an explanation, speaking of business deals turned sour, of unscrupulous partners who threatened his company if certain offshore transactions weren't made. He admitted that Ariel was involved in these deals, but insisted it was strictly professional, a necessary front to secure major investment. When Melissa mentioned the intimate scene at the penthouse, Christopher dismissed it as a facade, part of a ruse to gain trust. It was a tall tale, but he spun it convincingly. He then lowered his voice, eyes darting to ensure no one overheard. Melissa, there are people out there who want to destroy me. If you drag all this into court, they'll tear you and Adam apart too. I'm trying to protect you both. Melissa stared at him, searching for authenticity. Protect us by abandoning me while I was giving birth, she asked, her voice breaking. By humiliating me in front of everyone? Christopher winced. I was under enormous pressure. The deal had to be sealed that night, or everything would collapse. I couldn't risk it. I tried to call you, she cut him off. Don't lie to me. I checked the phone records. You never called. She took a steadying breath. This might be your twisted definition of protection, but it feels like betrayal. Silence settled over the table. Eventually, Christopher sighed. I know you won't believe me right now, but if you give me some time, I can prove everything I'm saying is true. He leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper. Withdraw the divorce petition for now. Let me fix this, for Adam's sake. Melissa stood, her decision made. You've already had more than enough time. I won't let you spin more lies. She paused, locking eyes with him. If you really want to fix this, then show up to mediation with the facts and a willingness to do what's right for your son. Otherwise, don't bother. Without another word, she walked away. Outside, Dominic peeled away from his post near the bar, offering a discreet nod. She felt a surge of relief, certain she'd done the right thing. Christopher's pleas only underscored how entangled he was in his own schemes. If he wanted to redeem himself, he'd have to do it through the proper channels, not clandestine meetings and half-truths. In the days leading up to the court-mandated mediation session, Patricia meticulously compiled the evidence of Christopher's evasiveness and potential financial misconduct. Dominic provided a dossier detailing suspicious transactions and the shady associations Christopher maintained. Melissa's heart thudded each time she reviewed the documents, a stark reminder of how far they had fallen from their once picturesque marriage. On the morning of the mediation, Melissa dressed in a modest navy suit, wanting to present herself as serious and composed. Janine stayed home with Adam, reassuring Melissa that everything would be fine. Outside the courthouse, grey clouds loomed, mirroring the heavy anticipation that filled the air. Inside a small, sterile conference room, Melissa sat beside Patricia. Across from them, Christopher occupied a seat, flanked by an austere, bespectacled lawyer. The tension in the room was palpable, the unspoken history between Melissa and Christopher lingering like a ghost. A court-appointed mediator, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, began by summarizing the dispute. Melissa was seeking primary custody and financial support. Christopher had yet to file a formal response, but he claimed to have evidence that could mitigate or excuse his behavior. When it was Christopher's turn to speak, he launched into his story of business deals gone sour, repeating many of the same claims he had made at the restaurant. His lawyer added that Christopher's financial assets were tied up in ongoing negotiations, implying that awarding Melissa large sums up front could cripple the company and, by extension, the family's long-term stability. Melissa felt her frustration spike. How dare he still place business above the well-being of their son? Patricia countered with the documents Dominic had unearthed. She presented the suspicious bank transfers, the multiple aliases, the glaring hotel bills. Each piece of evidence painted a picture of deception and possible criminal activity. Christopher's lawyer tried to downplay the significance, but it was clear they were taken aback by the thoroughness of Patricia's investigation. The mediator's expression grew increasingly grim. She turned to Christopher. Mr. Davis, these are serious allegations. Are you prepared to address them? Sweat glistened on Christopher's brow. He glanced at his lawyer, who whispered something inaudible. After a pause, Christopher softly said, I can't comment on all of these details due to non-disclosure agreements and ongoing negotiations. But I assure you, none of this is illegal. It was all in service of protecting our investments. Melissa exhaled a sharp breath. I gave birth alone. I haven't seen a dime for my child's care. How is that protecting our investments? Adam is not an investment. He's our son. Christopher's voice grew defensive. Don't paint me as a villain. You knew my business was high stakes. You knew there would be sacrifices. Patricia snapped back. Abandoning your wife in the hospital is not a business sacrifice. It's neglect. The mediator called for calm. Sensing that the session was spiraling, she proposed a temporary arrangement. Christopher would pay a specified sum in child support until the final financial details could be sorted out. In return, Melissa would allow supervised visitation rights for Christopher to see Adam. A further hearing would determine permanent custody. Neither side was thrilled, but it was a start. By the end of the mediation, a fragile agreement had been hammered out. Melissa left with mixed feelings, some relief that Christopher was now legally bound to provide for Adam, but also a nagging dread that this was far from over. She felt Christopher's gaze on her as she walked away, a silent promise that he wasn't giving up. Little did she know, the storm was about to intensify. In the following weeks, Christopher made a token attempt to see Adam through supervised visits, which took place in a neutral setting, a child-friendly room at a local community center. Melissa watched from a glass window, her emotions in turmoil. Christopher held Adam awkwardly, as though he were a fragile trinket. Sometimes he seemed genuinely moved by the baby's coos or smiles. Other times he appeared distant, lost in thought. Melissa couldn't tell whether he was wrestling with guilt or just going through the motions to appear cooperative in the eyes of the court. Meanwhile, Dominic's investigation reached a crescendo. He discovered leaked emails suggesting that Christopher had used investor funds for personal expenditures, including lavish gifts for Ariel Summers. Worse, some communications hinted at ties to unscrupulous financiers already under government scrutiny for money laundering. Dominic advised Melissa to be cautious if law enforcement began looking into Christopher's dealings. The mansion could be considered part of the seized assets. True to form, Christopher soon proved that his amends were nothing more than smoke and mirrors. One afternoon, as Melissa was returning from the community center, she found a notice taped to her front gate, signed by Christopher's lawyer, demanding that she vacate the mansion within 30 days. The letter stated that since the mansion was purchased before their marriage, Melissa had no entitlement to it. Furious, she immediately called Patricia, who reassured her that Christopher had no right to evict her without a proper court order, especially with a minor child involved. Nonetheless, the audacity of the attempt shook Melissa. A day later, Janine spotted Christopher driving by the mansion with Ariel in the passenger seat, smirking in Melissa's direction. It was the final straw. That night, sitting by Adam's crib, Melissa wept, feeling both despair and fury. Christopher was doubling down on intimidation, trying to drive her out, to break her spirit. She resolved then and there he would not succeed. She would see this through to the end, exposing every one of his misdeeds if necessary. Just when Melissa thought she'd reached her breaking point, fate intervened. Dominic sent her an urgent text, "Need to meet, have big news." They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe off the beaten path. Over a cup of tea, Dominic handed her a thick folder. Inside were detailed records of Christopher's illicit business activities, including forged contracts, shell corporations, and damning email exchanges that confirmed money laundering. Dominic had even managed to obtain a record of Christopher boasting about how he could dodge legal repercussions by hiding assets. Melissa's hands shook as she flipped through page after page, each revelation more incriminating than the last. She realized that Christopher's entire empire was built on a foundation of lies and theft. She felt sick, imagining how many innocent investors he might have swindled, how many laws he had broken with impunity. No wonder he had tried to keep everything under wraps. If the authorities saw this, he'd face serious jail time. Armed with this new evidence, Melissa returned to Patricia. Together, they prepared a comprehensive file, ready to submit to the court. Though it wasn't Melissa's direct responsibility to initiate criminal charges, she understood that once these documents were introduced in a custody hearing, law enforcement would undoubtedly take notice. Sure enough, the tide began to turn. A few days later, the same hush-hush rumors that had quietly followed Christopher's business dealings exploded into full-blown headlines. Investigative reporters uncovered shady trails of money leading to Christopher Davis. One major media outlet released a damning expose, complete with interviews of former employees who claimed Christopher manipulated financial records. The public outcry was swift, and Christopher's carefully curated image as a tech genius philanthropist crumbled overnight. As the scandal broke, Christopher frantically tried to contact Melissa, leaving rambling voicemails and pleading texts. He claimed he was misunderstood, that he needed her help to set the record straight. The man who had once been too busy to attend his son's birth was now desperate for the wife he had spurned. Melissa listened to his voicemails, her emotions in turmoil. But one fact stood out. Christopher only reached out after he realized his empire was on the brink of collapse. The final hearing arrived on a brisk morning. The courthouse buzzed with media presence, swarming to catch a glimpse of the fallen millionaire and his estranged wife. Cameras flashed as Melissa, clad in a simple but elegant grey suit, stepped out of her car. Patricia walked by her side, carrying the crucial documents in a neat folder. Inside the courtroom, Christopher appeared haggard, eyes rimmed with dark circles. Gone was the confident facade. His lawyer looked equally frazzled. The judge presiding over the case had reviewed the mountain of evidence provided by Patricia and Dominic. Melissa watched with an unblinking gaze as the judge rebuked Christopher for his reckless financial dealings, noting that criminal investigations were already underway. When it came to custody, the judge didn't mince words. "Mr. Davis, you've demonstrated a pattern of neglect and deceit. Until further review, full custody of Adam Davis is granted to Miss S. Melissa Davis, with supervised visitation rights under court-appointed guardians." Melissa's breath caught in her throat as the magnitude of the judge's words sank in. She had won custody of Adam, he would be safe with her. The judge also ordered Christopher to provide child support, pending the outcome of his criminal cases and the state of his assets once law enforcement concluded their investigations. The gavel fell with a resounding thud, and that was it. The final decree, the moment Melissa had been fighting for. Tears blurred her vision, but they weren't tears of sorrow, they were tears of relief and vindication. Outside, swarms of reporters clamored for statements. Patricia shielded Melissa from the crush of microphones, muttering, "No comment, respect the child's privacy." Amid the chaos, Melissa spotted Christopher, flanked by his lawyer, trying to weave past reporters. Their eyes met for a brief second, and in his gaze, she saw a profound regret. Whether it was regret for losing his son, losing his fortune, or losing his carefully constructed identity, Melissa would never fully know. With the storm behind her, Melissa focused on building a stable life for Adam. She took up a marketing consulting job, working part-time from home. Janine and her parents provided a loving support system. The mansion, now partially frozen under the court's orders, was still her residence for the time being. But more importantly, she felt a sense of liberation that transcended any material comfort. She had walked through the fire and come out stronger. Whenever she rocked Adam to sleep now, she didn't tremble with uncertainty. She felt hope, a calm certainty that they would be all right. Christopher would have to deal with the consequences of his own making. If he truly wanted to redeem himself, he'd have to do so from the ground up, far away from the illusions that once fueled his empire. And so, the woman once naive enough to believe in a fairy tale marriage ended up forging a new path, shaped by the lessons of heartbreak and betrayal, but also tempered by resilience and love. In the end, Christopher's downfall began the moment he chose to abandon his pregnant wife. And Melissa's victory was sealed the moment she decided never again to be a victim. Melissa Davis's story reminds us that true strength often emerges when life throws its most devastating challenges our way. From the heartbreak of being deserted in her hour of greatest need, to the fierce legal battles and revelations of wrongdoing, she stood her ground and protected what mattered most, her child and her integrity. While Christopher Davis was consumed by ambition and blinded by deception, Melissa forged a path to independence, proving that no amount of wealth can replace genuine loyalty and love. Today, her life may not be the pristine fairy tale she once envisioned, but it's real, filled with hope and the promise of a better tomorrow for Adam. Let her triumph inspire anyone facing betrayal or heartbreak. You can rise, you can fight back, and you can find happiness again. If you enjoyed this dramatic tale, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach others who might find hope or inspiration in them. Join our community to stay updated on new, captivating dramas. And let's continue to explore the powerful narratives that connect us all.